Hey, what's up, everybody? Welcome to the show. Yet another episode of Crushing Fantasy Football. I am Bryce Lockridge, your host of the show. All right, guys. I have been doing mock drafts on ESPN, and I've been drafting teams on Underdog Fantasy. I've been doing both. And I got to tell you, there is a huge ADP problem right now. Some of you might be aware of this. Some of you might not. But current ADP is a mess. And I'm going to be going over the mock drafts that I've been doing on ESPN and sort of talking to you about players that are going in places that are just wildly inaccurate, because I want to make sure that you all don't make these mistakes come season time, because I don't think the ESPN ADP is going to change all that much. So I first want to say that my last ESPN mock draft, I was able to start my team with Stephon Diggs and Garrett Wilson. Okay, if you've been drafting a lot on Underdog Fantasy, you would see that that would never happen. And it shouldn't, because both of these players are so good that they should be going in the first round. But Garrett Wilson is slipping to, mid to late second round on on ESPN as far as the mock drafts. And then as we progress, I have a list here of these players that are just going in ridiculous spots. Olave at the back end of round 3. Jerry Jeudy, DeAndre Hopkins, and Alexander Mattison in round 6. Marquise Brown, J.K. Dobbins, Calvin Ridley, and Drake London in round 7. DeAndre Swift, Kyle Pitts, Jackson Smith, and Jigba in round 8, and Kadarius Toney slipping like all the way to round 10. So if you've been drafting a lot on Underdog Fantasy and you look at where these players are being taken on the ESPN app, it's comical. It's absolutely ridiculous. In fact, of all my years of playing fantasy football, I've never seen such horrible ADP data. I mean, this is just all over the place. I mean, you literally just can't even take it seriously. So when you come into your redraft leagues this year, do not draft on ADP. You should be doing some drafts on Underdog Fantasy to get a more accurate version of where these players should actually be drafted, because on Underdog Fantasy, everyone's paying at least $5 for a draft. So when they're going through and drafting players, they're taking it seriously. They're staying there the whole time. They're not leaving the draft early. The reason the ADP data is so messed up on the ESPN app is because they draft their first 2 players and then they dip out. I don't know what their deal is. They have a short attention span, whatever, but they get on there, they draft their first 2 players, they think that's all that matters, and then they leave the app. And so the rest of the draft, the computer is drafting the players. So everyone's on auto draft. So as you can imagine, as we get further and further into the draft, the ADP gets even more ridiculous as you get into the later rounds as opposed to the early mid rounds where it's already really bad. It gets even worse as you go. So we have to understand that if we want an accurate reading on like where these players should actually be drafted, you need to look at professional ranking platforms. You can look at my rankings on my Patreon. You could go over to Fantasy Pros, although I think their ADP is a little bit all over the place right now myself. But, it's just a matter of preference. But at least get your rankings from a professional and don't base them on the ESPN app. And most importantly, the number one thing that you can do to actually understand where these players are being drafted so it doesn't screw you over when you get to your redraft league is you need to be doing some of these drafts on Underdog Fantasy, because everyone on Underdog Fantasy has money invested. They're not leaving early. They're a little bit more sharp as far as knowing where players should actually be going. So if you want an accurate reading on ADP, you need to get into some of these Underdog drafts. They're also tremendously fun. I'm not trying to promote for Underdog or anything. They're not paying me to sponsor them or anything like that. I just want you guys to know that the ADP data is an absolute mess right now, and you need to be very careful where you get your information. All right, guys. Appreciate you tuning in. Catch you later.